So what CQ is so powerful and really changes the game is that we're not judging each other. We're understanding each other. And then we can work more collaboratively, right? So that's the power of CQ. And we've talked about DEI for so long, and that's been super important. Don't get me wrong. Racism, discrimination, these are important topics. People still experience this, but I think there's a lot of people that want to do better. Okay. But when we start training, when I do workshops on DEI, I feel like we set a tone. You're privileged, you're underprivileged. And then these people become defensive because I'm not a racist. And then these people are like, well, I don't want a red carpet. I want to get the job because I'm qualified, not because, but CQ changes that. We're all on the same playing field now. So there's a difference in in how we approach the conversation that people can be ready to receive and open up.
Hi, I'm Christy Honeycutt, your host for Inside the C-Suite, where execs get real about leadership, impact, and what truly drives high-stake decisions. Today on Inside the C-Suite, we're joined by Brigitte, founder of Talent IQ and a leader calling out the gap between performative inclusion and what actually changes lives at work. With decades of experience across talent strategy, Indigenous ways of knowing, and executive leadership, Brigitte challenges organizations to stop mistaking intention for impact. Her work confronts broken hiring systems head on, rebuilding them around accountability, relationships, and respect that isn't optional. You do not need to be fixed to be powerful. Brigitte, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Hi, Christy. Thanks for that intro. Wow.
No, my pleasure. Is well deserved. And I know that I did not do your intro justice. I would love for you to, in your own words, introduce yourself to our audience and a little bit about Talent IQ.
Honestly, I think you did do it justice. But maybe if I could be a little bit more practical in what I can say. Well, Talent IQ was launched 5 years ago. And it's actually evolved quite a bit over the last 5 years. Part of that because I needed myself to detox the corporate world before really feeling comfortable and confident in what I wanted to do. So Talent IQ, as you said, helps go from intention to impact. I love living in that world because I think intention is great. It's the starting point, but it has to change the experience that people live. And that's where there's a gap, right? So how Talent IQ helps, well, it's through knowledge, connection, and culture. So knowledge by sharing cultural intelligence. What is this all about? That's one of my newfound learnings that I absolutely love. Through connection by building communities, people that can meet, connect, exchange, reflect together. You know, we're so in this world of moving fast, quick, and solutions have to be implemented. But how often do we have that gift and privilege of taking a step back and really sitting around a table and let's just think together? It's not about making a decision right now. It's just about sharing what we're going through, what we're thinking. And then culture, because a lot of it comes from culture, right? We all have our own individual culture, a team culture, a corporate culture, a community we're a part of. So it's undeniable that it impacts how we work. So that's where Talent IQ really has positioned itself in those three things: knowledge, connection, and culture.
So I am just sitting here beaming, so proud of the woman you are and the business you've built. And for those of you that don't know, Brigitte and I have worked together previously. Supported you, I've reported into you, and I succeeded you when you left at a former organization we were both at. So I am just astounded at what you've accomplished. It's so great. But why do you do this work? Why is this important to you?
Because I've witnessed as a child, I went to 4 different elementary schools, 4 different high schools, and just having quickly to feel like you belong somewhere. So that was my own personal experience, like going through this desire to want to be authentic to who you really are, but also want to feel like you belong. And that's sometimes can be in conflict with each other, right? And just witnessing others experiencing the same thing. It's about human connection. And when I was in the corporate world and going up the ladder, eventually there's always these systems that in which we work that tell us performance, metric. Oftentimes there's short-term results that we're seeking, but it goes against building a human organization where we feel like we belong, we feel that we trust the people we work with, where we feel like we're seen and heard. At one point, I had 100 people reporting it to me. But building this sort of barrier between what the organization is saying and what I wanted to build, and I was successful. And I was lucky because I was under the radar for a long time. So people weren't paying attention to me. So I had that freedom to do things my own way without someone hovering over me and saying, no, 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 you need to focus on this and what's going on with that. But eventually what happened is I was getting results, good results. People were now starting to talk. Clients loved what we were doing. The teams were just, you could feel it when you would walk in the room. And then I got attention and then people were over me. And that's when it became actually quite more difficult. It's like, get out of the way. Let me do this. So, that's kind of how at one point I had to leave. And there was no place that I felt like I would be able to do this work other than building my own business.
Well, and a lot of people don't know this. I mean, if you walked in a room, I'm assuming people assume that you are of some background that maybe you're not. Same with me. I get mistaken for a lot of different things. I'm Indigenous. I had no idea that this magical woman sitting in front of us was also Indigenous, but you ended up being, whether you knew it or not, a mentor and someone that I looked up to in how I wanted to progress my career, in how you made me feel, how you treated me, how you respected me, how you genuinely cared for the team. It was such a great thing. And now, years and years later, I find out that some of the people that I resonated with the most and that I enjoyed, and there was just a natural connection. Two of them are from my same tribe, which I never knew until recently, and then you as well. So I don't know why that's a thing, or why there seems to be an assimilation or a hide of your background. But I'm just curious if you want to share kind of your background and if there was any assimilation that you had to uncover.
Yeah, well, in part, my personal experience was that I was detached from my culture from a very early age, from 7 years old, and really only started reconnecting at 17. And during that time, as you said, when you look at me, maybe my last name, Skeen, would cause for pause. Where is that from? What's that about? But very often, because people didn't realize that I was Indigenous, I would be in rooms, part of conversations where I would hear things being said about Indigenous people that made me think, oh, well, I don't want to be seen that way. They're all alcoholics. They're not hardworking. You've heard it as well, right? So first of all, one, I needed to feel connected to that identity. Also, that there's also that sense of imposter syndrome of I didn't live in the community. I wasn't raised on the res with, and had to go through what they had to go through. I feel like I'm part of the privileged group. I lived outside of the community and all this stuff. So it's a mixture of so many things. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that question. But what can I say is that, for the past at least 10 years, it has been a very intentional and hard journey for me to be in that space and having to reconnect. And since I have now, I feel confident and I feel proud about my identity and what it brings. And more importantly, I want to share that with my children. I think when you have kids, you realize that there's something you want to pass on. And it's so important that that lives on and continues.
No, I love all of that because I know if you look historically, depending on what region you live in, there's a storyline behind Indigenous always. And for me, living in Oklahoma, I did go to Indigenous school that was in elementary. It was the elementary public school I went to. 3 hours a day, I went to Indigenous school. And I will never forget this because they did the reenactment of the Oklahoma land, which was, if you go back and you look at history, there was a Jaws thing where they were asking people to identify what they were. And then that would determine where you were going to live, essentially. So a lot of people did not stand up and say, "Hi, I'm Indigenous," right? Because they wanted to protect their property or their people or whatever the case may be, or it was some sort of rebellion as well. And so you have that coming up. So I go to this Oklahoma, they had an Oklahoma land run reenactment at my elementary. My grandma, Bridget, had to make a pilgrim's outfit for me to wear. And I remember being confused because the only thing I had for like a cultural alignment was cowboys and Indians, right? So
Mhm.
growing up in the 80s, like that's the only thing I had. And I just thought it was weird that there was no, the only one that was represented was the Pilgrims. And we went out and reenacted the stealing of land, which would have been indigenous people's land. And when I look back at how that might have impacted my family, I didn't know as a kid. I just knew that I needed to assimilate. And then
Mhm.
as I got older and you start checking boxes, if you check Native American and anything in the United States, they're going to want to know what percentage. And now you're getting into a question of bloodline sort of things.
How pure are you?
How pure are you? I mean, and there is imposter syndrome, right? Because now there's all these regimented checks on if you are or if you aren't, regardless of how you raised or any of that. And then even within my tribe, because I don't speak the language, my mom gets given a hard time that I wasn't raised appropriately. Again, I was raised outside the res as well. But there's so much history that I don't think a lot of people realize. And it does show up at work. It does impact. And me later in my career, I just had an aha moment. Like some of the people I'm closest to or that I resonate with are people from indigenous cultures. And I don't know what that's about. And many of us, I think, are getting reconnected as we get older. It is important, like you said, to pass down and share to our children some sort of culture, some sort of sacred knowledge,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I feel also there's what comes with it, with what's going on in the world. It's also a sense of responsibility with that. And how can I carry this forward? Because I do strongly believe that we're out of balance. And part of the indigenous ways is what can bring us back into balance. So, yeah, I cherish that very much.
Well, and I know that you talk about cultural intelligence, which I geek out over the term. I think it's great. What is it? Why is it important? And why is EQ no longer enough for today's leaders?
Right. So, well, I'll address that last one first. Why EQ is not enough today. So, what is emotional intelligence? So, emotional intelligence is our ability to recognize emotions in ourselves, in others, and sort of calibrate that. Now, the issue is different cultures express emotions differently. So, while I think I'm reading that well, I'm not necessarily. So, we are inevitably multicultural in every walks of life now today, right? So that's where CQ really steps in. So it helps us distinguish now how culture influences us in so many ways. And so let's define culture. So we often think, when we think of cultural, think of ethnicity, but it's so much more
Yeah.
than that, right? There's so many invisible layers of culture. So culture is a shared pattern of beliefs, of values, assumptions, behaviors that really distinguishes a group from another, right? And so what I find very profound in the change, remember when we were moving from intention to impact. So what CQ has the ability to do is just that. So what I see is a natural human thing that we do. We experience an interaction with either an individual or a group, and we make assumptions and conclusions. And some of those are often sounding like this. Oh, she's way too emotional. Oh, man, he has such an ego. Boy, are they disorganized. And when we unpack that with that lens of cultural intelligence, we realize it's not who they are. It's just how they work, how they show up, right? So instead, it's just behavioral preferences that they have that are different to us. So what CQ is so powerful and really changes the game is that we're not judging each other. We're understanding each other. And then we can work more collaboratively, right? So that's the power of CQ. And we've talked about DEI for so long, and that's been super important. Don't get me wrong. Racism, discrimination, these are important topics. People still experience this, but I think there's a lot of people that want to do better. Okay. But when we start training, when I do workshops on DEI, I feel like we set a tone. You're privileged, you're underprivileged. And then these people become defensive because I'm not a racist. And then these people are like, well, I don't want a red carpet. I want to get the job because I'm qualified, not because, but CQ changes that. We're all on the same playing field now. So there's a difference in just and how we approach the conversation that people can be ready to receive and open up.
You know what I one thing I found, and there's a wonderful woman who I believe is retired now, but her name is Gail Obaski in the United States. And she coined the term the honeycomb of diversity, which I love because it talks about a honeycomb and the many layers and the many cells and that it all takes up to work together. One of the things she did that I thought was so impactful and kind of bringing culture forward so people could stop seeing age and race and all the different things that we see and hear with our eyes and ears. And she brought in a cultural component of food because we all laugh and we all eat. And so she would do different highlights on different cultures' backgrounds and what was authentic food to them. So you could get to taste it, understand, well, these fruits grow in this area. They make it for this, they make this for medicine, whatever the case may be. But just a little bit of insight into the cultures by food because everybody eats. So now when you're going and you're eating, you're connecting to that culture, you're connecting to why something's done a certain way. So there's this appreciation almost, I think, that begins to happen in a very natural way. So when I hear what you're talking about, that's what I think about. Like, what are alternative ways to help bring us together that aren't the traditional alphabet soup of D and I? Because I think we've all tried to figure it, we've all cracked the code or didn't crack the code. There are a lot of people that are out of work. I think what you're doing is very important, but I'm just curious, does that resonate with you? And where would you see other activities that could help bring knowledge into the space and understanding?
So yes, it resonates. I mean, when CQ is based on 4 dimensions, okay? And if you want to develop your CQ, this is the framework that you would go about. And the first one is part of which what you're talking about, and it's one of the elements, it's CQ motivation. So just look at it as there's some people that are very curious about other cultures. I just traveled the world my entire life, and if I have money to spend, it's going towards travel, you know? And just to say, my brother is completely different. He's stayed in North America. He's never been anywhere else. And he's like, what? Where are you going? So you can see right away our CQ motivation is very different, but it's something that can build over time as you experience this. The other thing that's part of CQ motivation is confidence level. Oftentimes what impacts your CQ, and I hear this constantly, I want to interact and be present and create connection with other cultures, but I'm afraid. We've created this environment, and part of it might be the DEI stuff where, oh, microaggressions and this and that. Listen, we're not always going to say the right thing, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's coming from a bad place. So that's created fear in people, and that's holding us back from even interacting. So if you're not interacting, you're not building anything.
That's huge.
That's huge. So perhaps, like you were just saying, that honeycomb effect, just sitting around, not talking business, not making decisions, not trying to solve anything, but just a communal meal. That might just help us rest a little bit, have some ease into it. So to that point, yes. Now, if I were to just quickly talk to you about the other dimensions. So once you have, there's the motivation and the confidence level, then you have the knowledge. So in knowledge, there's 10 behavioral preferences that we all have. Okay. And we can either be on one end or the other or somewhere in that spectrum. And so once you understand this, you understand, first of all, your own preferences. I understand why you and I, because we have these that are very similar, but what does that look like when someone doesn't have the same preferences as me? I'm not going to tend to go towards them because I sense that friction. But we have to build connection with people who are not like us. So that's what the knowledge helps us do. We have things that we name. We have things that we understand. So again, it's behaviors and preferences and not judging the person that they're this or that. So once we have the motivation and we have a basis of knowledge, then we can have a strategy. We have to think about, before I go and meet this person, what do I know of this person? How can I show up respectfully? And what's really mind-boggling to me, everybody wants to be respectful. I do these conferences, I'm in a big room, and I say, who here wants to be respectful? Everybody raises your hand. But we're not always respectful. It's that alone, wanting to be respectful doesn't make you respectful. Because I think we have learned this golden rule our entire lives. The golden rule tells us, treat others the way you want to be treated, and everything will be okay if you do that. But the reality is that doesn't work. We have to now shift to what I call the platinum rule. treat others the way they want to be treated.
Yeah.
And for that, you have to take into account the other person. So for that, you need strategy. You need to plan your conversations, be mindful of that, and after those interactions, think about, is there something I've misread? Why did this pop in my mind? Oh, I sense friction there. And that helps us improve, right? So, and the final one is action. If I don't take action and do something differently or put myself out there or try to build that and create that trust, and then nothing's ever going to change, right? So it has to become, that's where it becomes visible to others, right? So those are the dimensions of CQ intelligence. Yeah.
I love all of it. Thank you for walking us through that. So, if we think about the Indigenous ways of knowing and executive decision making, what's one lesson from Indigenous leaders that most boardrooms are structurally not set up to hear?
I think there's two things that are really coming to mind where I feel that we can agree on many different points, although we may not be exactly at the same place. But two things where oftentimes it becomes confrontational. One is the notion of time. Indigenous ways of seeing the world is we think of our decisions and how it impacts the 7 future generations. And if you think about the typical corporate system and world, we look at it as shareholders, quarterly, year. And that's in conflict, in huge conflict. The other one is collectivism versus individualism. And when I express this, I just want to be very careful to say there's not one that's better than the other. It's not about Indigenous worldviews being better than Western worldviews. They each, if we can find a way to when is it most appropriate to apply one versus the other, we would live in a much better world. So the other element is that collectivism versus individualism, where it's in some corporate environments, those decisions that are being made really benefit a few individuals versus the collectivism. So Indigenous ways of doing things is really about, let's get the input from our community that we serve. Every voice counts. And again, that goes back to time. That takes time, right?
That definitely takes so much time. At what point does good intention become leadership negligence?
That's such a good question because I see this all the time and nobody benefits, not even the leadership that have those good intentions. It's when it becomes performative, when those intentions are really just to serve yourself. There's no deeper reason behind it. And you really know when the intention is real, when there's a decision that's confronting that has them to take a position that's a hard one. And that will have to say, no, that was my intention and I'm sticking with it. Because oftentimes that's when it falls apart. When things are going great and your intentions, you're riding on that intention, but at one point there's going to be certain decisions or time sensitive things that you're going to have to deal with where you're going to have to prove.
Yeah, go put your money where your mouth is at that point. So when we talk about performative versus meaningful inclusion, what does meaningful work actually mean when you listen to Indigenous talent instead of defining it for them?
Well, it goes back to their lived experience in the workplace. It has to come back to how they. So it's hard to give you, there's no recipe. There's no check. I know, we like that, right? It's like tangible.
We do.
And I want to know I'm doing the right thing.
Let
But
me check the box.
yeah, it's a reflection thing. You have to ask yourself these questions. Okay, so we've made the decisions. How it is impacting their experience, right? So do they feel like they have to leave their identity at the door? Have we valued their beliefs, their way of knowing, right? So I'll give you a very simple example. I teach at the FNEE, which is the First Nations Executive Education. I teach in the Women Leadership Program, in the Governance Program, and in the Next Generation, which is for youth. All around leadership, courageous leadership. And when we meet, it just happens. It's not a rule that we have, but we take the time again that everyone speaks. And when someone is talking, there's no interruptions. Just think about that for a moment in a corporate setting when you're in a meeting. It's bang, bang. Someone says something. Someone else comes in. Da, 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 and you feel you have to rush to say what you want to say to get it out. It's such a relief. It's a gift that just keeps on giving, that makes people really feel good. And there's so much wisdom that comes out.
You guys use as a talking
So
stick. Yes.
sometimes I bring my own talking stick. but more just to remind ourselves because, hey, we
Mhm.
all navigate in the non-Indigenous world as well. So sometimes we have these habits that we develop and we got to go, whoa, wait a minute. So it doesn't necessarily mean, but yes, you could be holding it. And when that person is holding that, we're all attentive and listening. They have something to say and it needs to come out, and whatever will be, will be. So how are organizations, again, from your question, so it doesn't become performative, we have to see, are we valuing those things? So when leaders come to me and they want to hire Indigenous people, do you understand Indigenous worldviews? There's steps. You can't jump these steps and go from hiring them when you haven't prepared the groundwork ahead of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Got to bake the cake with all the right ingredients. So if we're looking at rebuilding the system, what would you say to a CEO that thinks inclusion is important but not urgent?
I think people are just tired of hearing the word inclusion. When it's like,
I
they
agree.
do that and they cringe. The question becomes, when you don't have, let's say, cultural intelligence, you might be misinterpreting intention. You might be unintentionally offending. You might create friction. So think about how that impacts negotiations with partners, with your clients. Again, your multicultural environment is not just your people and your employees. That should be your number one focus. But anyways, it seems like when you look outward, then they pay more attention, but your clients are multicultural, your partners, your investors. So it's not a matter of, is it important? It's you're confronted with it. So it's your choice. It's your choice. Do you want to take that as a superpower that you will have and build your confidence and get better results? It's up to you.
I love that you tie it back to their clients because if there's an emerging leader, a CEO sitting on and watching this, they're always focused, rightfully so, about the income and the profitability, right? So, but it's crazy to me that a lot of people don't action until they know it's hitting their pocketbook. Then suddenly it's important. So I agree with you. I think it's urgent and it's important at the same time for all the reasons that you laid out. So when you advise CEOs, Bridget, and you're taking them from zero, what are the top three signals that their process or systems are broken in regards to Indigenous, inclusive, cultural hiring? What are the top three signals that you see?
Well, the first one is when there's no common, depending on who you're speaking to, because I don't always speak to only one person. You got to speak to a few people to get the real picture. That's part of my process when I'm engaging with a client. And when you see everybody has a different story, we're not all saying the same thing. We don't all feel the same. And it's okay that we don't all feel
Mhm.
the same way, but there's no common, why are we doing this? That's the second one. Do people understand, why are we doing this? The French word is coming to mind, but that conviction, you're committed to this deep down.
Mhm.
Because again, you're going to be confronted with hard decisions to make, and that are, I think, are there to strengthen our strategy and really help us build and move forward. So that would be signal number two. So when people are not saying the same thing. Two, when we can't clearly define the why, when that's not clear. Is there another one? Those are the ones that are really coming to mind for me. Yeah, those are big ones.
Three might be your people are not really happy where they are, and you're seeing all kinds of signals. No, I think those are really valid and practical ones there. So, how should leaders rethink fit? And for those of you that can't see me, I'm doing air quotes around fit. If they genuinely want innovation and belonging, how can they rethink that?
Well, yeah, that the word fit just makes me ugh.
I know it's a grungy word.
Yeah, because Brene Brown says something. She says, if I have to change who I am to fit in, then I don't belong, right? So I think we need, again, coming back to language, inclusion, fit. It's true to say that if the individual that we're hiring, that we're bringing into an organization is not aligned with our values, our way of working, then they're not going to be happy. The problem is we haven't properly defined it. Okay. So you ask again, organizations, describe your culture to me. What do you guys stand for? What is it about? And they'll regurgitate the values that are on the website. But how are those lived? And we skip this. Like, this is something, again, we make it transactional, but it's so deeply rooted in things that are unwritten rules. And I think that's a really important exercise to do. And only once you are very clear, and some of your cultural definition can be aspirational. Like maybe we're not there yet, but this is where we want to go and this is where we want to be. Okay, now we need to hire, and everything we do needs to be built around this. And we need to ask ourselves, is this policy, is this process, is this rule or whatever aligned to this? And if not, then move it aside. This is just going to hinder us, right? So the first step is really to clearly understand what culture you have and what culture you want.
So, what's the most uncomfortable truth executives need to hear about inclusion and culture right now?
That whether, well, I think some of it depends on the size of the organization as well. Listen, I have not yet met an organization that doesn't have things that are broken in their system.
Right.
So if they are sort of having this blind view of things and they're covering their eyes and saying, I don't want to see it, there's no point, right? So you have to be open to see things for real and take them for what they are. So often they'll do surveys in companies, right? And employees will, and then they'll say, yeah, but that's not important. They pick and choose what's important.
What's important?
You got to listen. You got to open your eyes and you got to accept what's being said if you really want to make the change you want to make.
So, my final question before we jump into closing, this has been beautiful. I got two more for you. This one's more tactical. What is your guidance to everybody, regardless of title, regardless of organization, on how they can lean in a little bit differently on culture intelligence? How can we be better together as a community?
I think one is just acknowledging our own moments when those things come up in our mind, like I was saying earlier, those quick judgments that we make. We're going to continue to make those. We're human. It's enough. Well, don't feel bad about it, but recognize it and at least take a moment to pause and think, what am I missing here? What is this saying about myself? And what could it be else than what I think I'm seeing? Okay. So that's one thing we can do. And the other thing is really important and so simple, paying attention to the voices that are at the table. Let's make the table bigger. Sometimes it's like, well, there's so much space at the table. Who said the table had to only be this amount of people? Just break the table.
Sit a circle on the floor for all. Yeah, no, I love that. That's really good.
And if we just did those little things, I think that could be a really great start.
I love that. The one for me is going to be keeping the talking stick in mind at all times. And, an imaginary talking stick. But if you think about when you go to conferences and someone has a microphone, you're listening to the person with the microphone. So it shouldn't be any different on Zoom or in a round table or on the floor in a circle, or wherever you do. Like, just please give the respect and hear the person out. I think that was one of the biggest takeaways mentally and visually from what you said that I took. So I love that. Well, Brigitte, I think the world of you. You are a strong lady boss, and it's been such an honor to watch you grow. Is there anything that we didn't cover off? Any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience? And please include how people can get in touch with you and work with you.
If you feel you're in a place where you don't belong, you gotta move. That's something I want to tell people. There's this notion we gotta work through it. We gotta be, sometimes we feel like we have all that responsibility in a way, as I was saying earlier, to drive the change. That can be exhausting and we have to be mindful of ourselves. So what I've realized with Talent IQ, I know who my customers are and I know who they're not.
Yeah.
So that's my first thing. How to get in touch with me? Well, LinkedIn, that's the easy way, I would say, or check out my website, talentiq.ca. And I love when people reach out and looking forward to making more connections.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much. And from my heart and our community's heart, thank you for all the work you do. Okay. Guys, if you enjoyed this conversation, please go check out this woman, like and follow and subscribe to Inside the C-Suite and nominate who you'd like to see next. Ciao.